Freedom is a strange thing. When you don't have it, you will do almost anything to get it. You will beg the world to hear your cries. You will ask strangers to stand beside you. You will hope someone, anyone, will believe your pain. But history asks us a far more uncomfortable question. What happens after you are finally free? Do you become the kind of person who protects others from suffering? Or do you slowly become the very thing you once fought against? South Africa once stood at the center of one of history's greatest injustice, which is apartheid. A system built on segregation, exclusion, on telling people they did not belong because of who they were, and Africa did not look away. Countries across this continent stood with South Africa, Nigeria especially. Our government spoke, our people contributed money, our musicians sang, our students protested, our diplomats fought on international stage, not because South Africans were Nigeria, but because their pain belonged to Africa. Today, many years later, Africans migrants are being hunted, businesses destroyed, families displaced, life lost, not because they have committed crimes, but because they crossed a border. So today, I have just one question. How does the people who once begged the world to see their humanity struggle to see the humanity in others? Welcome to the Noble Frequency, a podcast where we get to think deeper and listen differently. This is not a podcast about teaching you what to think. It is a space for conversation that goes beyond the surface. The conversations people are often too afraid to have or too comfortable to question. My name is Afistonova. When life becomes difficult, human beings have always searched for someone to blame. History repeats this pattern. Economic hardship, unemployment, rising crime, political failure. Instead of confronting complicated problems, we often choose a simpler enemy, the outsider, the immigrants, the foreigner, because it is easier to point at a neighbor than to fix a nation. So let's ask an uncomfortable question. If every foreigner left South Africa tomorrow, would unemployment disappear? Would corruption disappear? Would inequality disappear? Would electricity stay on? Would the cost of living suddenly fall? Probably not, which means maybe immigrants aren't the disease. Maybe they are simply the easiest symptom to attack. Let's go back. Long before hashtag, long before social media, Nigeria stood with South Africa during apartheid, not because we expected repayment, but because injustice anywhere in Africa was considered everyone's concern. Ordinary Nigerians donated money. Workers contributed part of their salaries. Students marched. Artists raised awareness. Diplomats pushed for sanctions against apartheid. Africa believed that when one nation suffered, we all suffered. That wasn't charity. It was solidarity. So here is what troubles me. How do we move from your struggle is our struggle to go back to your country? How does borderhood become suspicious? But before we Nigerians begin applauding ourselves, let's be honest, this episode isn't about proving we are morally superior, because prejudice doesn't belong to South Africa alone. If Nigeria experienced prolonged economic hardship and a sudden rise in immigration, would every Nigerian respond with compassion? Would some of us also begin blaming outsiders? Do we stereotype people from neighboring countries? Do we mock accents? Do we use words that reduce people to where they come from? If we are honest, we are not humane, which means this episode isn't about South Africans. It is about us. It is about human nature. One of history's saddest lessons is that suffering does not automatically make people compassionate. Sometimes it simply changes who they are angry at. The oppressed can become the oppressor. The victims can become the perpetrator. Freedom doesn't erase prejudice. It only gives us an opportunity to confront it. And if we don't, history simply changes uniforms. Here is another question. When citizens are angry, who benefits if that anger is directed at immigrants instead of institutions? When unemployment rises, who benefits if people attack shop owners instead of demanding better governance? When frustration boils over, who benefits when the conversation becomes about foreigners instead of failed leadership? Sometimes the easiest enemy isn't the real enemy, it is simply the most convenient one. We love saying Africa is one Africa, African brotherhood. Those words sounds beautiful until they are tested. Brotherhood isn't measured by speeches, it is measured by how we treat one another when resources are scarce. It is easy to love Africa when the economy is booming. It is much harder when there is competition for jobs, housing, and opportunity. That's when our values are tested. Every country has the right to protect its borders. Every nation has the right to enforce its immigration laws. That is not the issue. The issue begins when people stop seeing human beings and start seeing enemies. History should have taught us that exclusion is dangerous, that discrimination destroys nations, that violence solves nothing. Yet, here we are, Africans, fleeing Africans, fearing Africans, fighting Africans. Perhaps the greatest tragedy isn't that xenophobia still exists, it is that we have forgotten why we fought for each other in the first place. Because the lessons of apartheid wasn't simply that racism is evil. It was that no human being should ever be treated as less human because of where they come from. And if we forget that lesson, we haven't really learned at all. This has been the Nova Frequency. Remember, think deeper and listen differently.